saw former President Donald Trump taking questions from the media for roughly an hour. There were a number of falsehoods and lies during that time, including he kept saying over and over again that Vice President Kamala Harris was the border czar for the Biden administration. She was not ever officially the border czar. She did work to try and spur economic development in some of those countries to try to curb the number of people who were coming to the border. But let's go to Tom Foreman, because he's got a lot more specifically on the border, on immigration. Tom, what did you notice?
Yeah, I'm glad you got started on this, because there is a lot to unpack in terms of falsehoods. Let's start with the economy, a big thing for many issues out there. He said we could literally be in the throes of a depression, not a recession. He said close to a 1920s depression. 1920s, the depression was 25% unemployment. We're at 4.3% now. Not even close, not even the same ballgame. He also mentioned, weirdly enough, people can't buy bacon. I checked on bacon sales, they seem to be doing just fine. On the border, as Brianna noted earlier, he grossly overinflates the number of people coming over the border there. He also repeated a claim that he's made many times before, that he really must like, even as the numbers fall here, saying this notion that people are coming out of mental institutions and prisons, as he said, all over the world. They're emptying into the United States. He said this many times, never offered any proof for it. About Kamala Harris, he says she's the most unpopular / worst vice president in history, couldn't pass her bar exam. Scholars surveyed by the LA Times ranked VPs from 1933 on. They put Harris at 11 out of 18. Not great, but certainly not the worst. And she did pass her bar exam, even though she had to do it more than once. She said President Biden had the presidency taken away from him. Not true. That is false. President Biden agreed to leave the presidency. He wasn't happy about it. Nobody would be, but he agreed to leave, and he backs Harris in her campaign. He said everybody wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. The country overwhelmingly wanted this and returned to the states. Not true. Even now, more than 2 years afterward, a Pew study said that 63% of people still think abortion nationwide should largely be legal, not left up to the states. And one more thing, he talked for quite some time there about how he protected Hillary Clinton and always wanted to keep her safe. But at least more than a half dozen times in recent years, he has said publicly she should go to jail, and a whole lot of other Democrats as well.
All right, Tom Foreman, thank you so much for that. That was quite the list. Let's go to Kristen Holmes, who is there in the room asking some questions as well. Kristen?
Yeah, Brianna, if you asked Donald Trump, I was asking stupid questions because I asked why he hasn't been campaigning at such a critical point for his campaign. And I will tell you, speaking to his allies, they have been very concerned that he's not out there on the campaign trail. One of the things he said was because he was leading by so much and that he would pick up his campaigning after the Democratic convention. But I will tell you that, again, from speaking to senior advisors and people close to the campaign, they do not believe that he is leading by so much. Are they cautiously optimistic? Yes. Do they believe at the end of this day that fundamentally they can make this the same kind of race it was against President Joe Biden? Yes, they do, because they believe that they can focus on those policies like inflation, like the economy, like crime. But that does not mean that he is leading by a lot, and he has been largely behind closed doors for the last week, with the only rally that he's doing this week in Montana at 10 p.m. East Coast time, in a state that is not a swing state. Now, he defended those decisions, saying that some of the states that he was visiting that were Republican states were because he was helping other Republican candidates. But he mostly clearly got upset when talking about campaigning against the Harris campaign, in particular, those crowd sizes. Obviously, one thing we know about Donald Trump is he is fixated on the amount of people who attend both his rallies and the rallies of his rivals. He was all fixated on that today. When he was asked the question, he did not let it go. He said over and over again that his crowds were bigger. He listed enormous crowds that he had had various times and saying that Harris's crowds were much smaller than that. And so clearly, even though he is projecting this confidence that he is leading by a lot, that this is something that he is paying very close attention to. And I can tell you from my conversations with allies of his, he has brought it up in those conversations, the crowd size itself. So as we go forward, some of the news that was made not just the rambling and the ranting that we saw, was the fact that he has agreed to 3 debates, one with Fox, one with ABC, one with NBC. That is something that now is in Kamala Harris's court. Obviously, both of them have agreed to the ABC debate, so that seems like it's going to happen on September 10th. But other than that, this seemed like it was just Donald Trump taking advantage of an opportunity to bring press here and take those questions. And I will remind you, one of the things we said coming into this press conference, he was going to say over and over again that Kamala Harris has not taken a question from the press. He did, in fact, do that when he was up at the podium today.
Yes, and I should have fact-checked that as the first thing, that Kristen Holmes asks smart questions.
That's
We're
right.
all just very aware of that. It goes without saying. Kristen Holmes, live for us from Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you very much.
I want to go now to Julia Chatterley, who we talked to earlier in our show. And Julia, you were explaining what a lot of this economic data is showing to us. The former president saying that if he were president, there would have been no inflation. He said that we were headed for what he called a 1929-like crash. Can you fact check all that for us?
I'd love to. I don't know what economy he's looking at, but it's not the US economy. There was a lot of nonsense, quite frankly, in what he was saying. Let's do the president a favor, former president, because I think he needs it. Let's not use 1929. Let's use peak crisis, 1933. Growth collapsed 30%. Right now in the United States, we're tracking growth of around 2.9%, so positive and not bad. Back then, unemployment rate 25%. 1 in 4 American workers were out of work. Right now, we've got an unemployment rate of around 4.3%. That's just over 7 million workers out of work. Wages back then collapsed 40%. For those that were still working, we've got positive wages. Prices back then collapsed 25%. We know we've got an inflation rate that we're not keen on. No inflation? Wrong. We did have inflation, we just weren't worried about it in January 2021. It was around 1.4%. Now by June of 2022, here's the problem for Biden, it was 9.1%. And I think economists agree a lot of that, one, we were coming out of the pandemic, but we spent trillions of dollars trying to help people, including the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Biden signed it into law. And I think everybody agrees that didn't help the inflation picture. Prices were up over 20% and are, and this is what people are struggling with today since February of 2021. So I hate to give him talking points, but if you want talking points, that would be a better one than any of the nonsense that he said. And if you want anything more, I can talk to you about oil prices and more. But hey, nonsense, my takeaway. Sorry.
Well, we appreciate that and the history lesson as well, Julia. Thank you so much. All right, guys, what did you think, Lance, of his press conference
I'll
there?
go back to where we started. I can't wait for the vice president to come in front of reporters, not a pre-screened list, and take questions for an hour. I think that's what needs to happen. What we saw today was a pretty typical Donald Trump press conference, but I think if you're the campaign, you accomplished 2 goals that you set out doing. You made news on debates, and you put the Harris campaign on the defensive, and you leaned into, I stood and took questions for an hour. It's time for her to come out and take questions as well.
I don't think the Harris campaign is on the defensive. What we saw in that hour-long hodgepodge of lies isn't any different than what we see at Trump campaign rallies. What he did there was showcase his level of fear, to be honest. This is a guy who continues to advocate for the 2020 election being stolen. This is a guy who is seeing the numbers that show that Georgia is more than in play and would like to act as though it has been stolen, even though every other Republican on that ticket won except the guy at the top. I think that this is also a guy who decided to use his MAGA greatest hits and attack everyone, from Barack Obama to Hillary Clinton to the current ticket that he's running against. Nothing there was anything other than what people expected, quite frankly, and they're used to the lies. Trump is running scared. He doesn't want to really have to have a true conversation with his opponent, and he's advocating for a very interesting set of debates when we think about it. Like, what are they, a little over a week apart, 4 in 1 month? I think that's completely ridiculous. We'll see how this shakes down, but Trump is scared.
You're picking apart because he wants to do debates? I mean, what's the what's the time frame? Who cares if they're going to do debates? Though?
Nobody is settled for a debate every 8 days. Like, that's a little bit crazy.
I was talking to a pollster before we came in here, and we were talking about what he does. I mean, the one thing about Donald Trump, and we can debate this, his favorability rating right now is the highest it's ever been. I saw some polling with some competitive congressional districts this week. Same thing. His polling, people know who he is. They know where he stands, and so we can talk about how all the things that he did in here, but people kind of know that. They kind of come to expect it with him. And I think, again, I think he accomplished the goals he set out to do today.
One thing he did say is that the vast majority of the country does support me. That is not quite true. He's never won the
I didn't
popular
say that.
vote. I know you didn't. He said it, though. He said the vast majority of the country does support me. I think, though, Kristen got on to a point that got under his skin, obviously, about how he has been campaigning. He simply hasn't been campaigning as much. And I think this is one of the biggest differences from his other two presidential campaigns. He was certainly out there more. So we'll see if it changes after the Democratic convention. There's no doubt that things move on after summertime, but he's different in this campaign. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, he hasn't been campaigning as much, and we'll have to see if Harris starts taking questions. They both can hit each other on that. We'll see. Thank you so much.